So what we were doing with, just as a quick review, and if it's okay with you, we'll just pick up from where we left off yesterday, talking about the concept of, since it is Shavuos, since in the title of my slot, Rabbi Sofer. So yes, I don't have a congregation, but I am a certified scribe for the last over 30 some odd years. But so with the idea of recreating the concept of Har Sinai, so with the idea of Sinai right now, so what we see is the following, is that Moshe Rabbeinu received the Torah, and Moshe Rabbeinu received the Torah, and he taught it over to Bnei Israel. And we're not talking about necessarily the repeat of the Egel and the golden calf and that stuff. That's a topic for a different day. But so we were talking about the authenticity of our Torahs today, and we're going to get into a little bit of that as well. But basically what we started with was learning the Rambam Hilchos Sefer Torah, and within that we see that the mitzvah, there is a mitzvah, and we'll talk about the Minchas Chinuch, which is the book of education, which the Rambam does discuss, has his own order of mitzvahs as well. He also has 613. But one of the things that we'll see is that the Rambam does go ahead and gets into not only the mitzvah of writing a Torah, but he gets into the do's and don'ts. He discusses a lot of the particulars, and there are some parameters from different Gemaras that are discussed as far as why we need these parameters. And the main reason is that we want to make sure that our Masorah is correct. So there are a lot of different particulars, and we'll get into those as well. But one of the key things that the Rambam said in the beginning of this chapter was that if one writes a Torah, it is as if he is writing he received it directly from Moshe on Sinai. So that's why I thought, especially as we have this holiday of Shavuos coming up, it's a nice idea to actually think about, like, what is this all about? So we discussed yesterday about so the Rambam says that it's mutter lichtov haTorah kol chumash v'chumash b'fnei atzmo. As we said, when we're discussing tefillin and mezuzos, okay, we said the acronym for a sofer stam, a scribe that writes Sefer Torah, tefillin and mezuzos. The samach is Sefer Torah, and the suf is for a tefillin, and the mem is for mezuzah. So there is one stark difference between, aside from a mezuzah being a lot shorter than a Torah, and a tefillin are folded up very differently. They're also the shel yad and the shel rosh. But one of the things that we see that's a major stark difference is that we see with tefillin and mezuzahs, they have to be written in order. I cannot start from the middle of a mezuzah and start writing the mezuzah and then write the words Shema. It's got to be from beginning Shema up until the end. So too tefillin as well. Each parsha has to be written in order. When you talk about a Torah, the Rambam says clearly that it's permissible lichtov haTorah kol chumash v'chumash, each and every one of the 5 books by itself, b'fnei atzmo, by itself, b'hen kedusha sefer Torah. That as you're writing it, there is in each of the volumes, there is no sanctity of a sefer Torah. Avol lo yichtov Megillah b'fnei atzmo, but you shouldn't write a Megillah by itself, sheyiyah bo parshos, because it doesn't necessarily have sections. And when we're talking about a Megillah, we're talking about the 5 Megillos. We're talking because each of those Megillos are also not just Esther, which everyone is familiar with, but Eicha, which is read on Tisha B'Av, Koheles, which is read on Sukkot, Chol HaMoed Sukkot, Rus, which is read this coming Shabbos, and on Shavuos, and Shir HaShirim as well. All those are also written on parchment as well. The laws that are guiding a Torah are not the same as those that guide a Megillah. It's fascinating that the Rambam sticks in the concept of writing a Megillah here because they are so starkly different. For instance, a Megillah Esther doesn't have the name of God in there, so there is no real holiness to it. The fact that it's from the written works called Kesuvim, so it does lend itself to a level of holiness. However, it doesn't compare to the holiness of a Torah. Ve'ein Kesuvim Megillah Latino Klatamaba, and you shouldn't write a Megillah to teach a child either. Okay, because a Megillah does have a level of holiness, but it doesn't have nearly the same. And you don't want a child to necessarily, just take the scroll and, make it like it's worthless. However, if you do want to make it that you're going to make a chumash out of one of the scrolls, like we mentioned yesterday, Kasa Megillah Shalosh Tevos V'Shita Achas Mutter. Now, again, when it comes to, we said yesterday with a Torah, it's got to be 36 words on a line. With a Megillah, you can write it a little differently. You don't have to follow the same rules. And if you do look inside a Megillah, you'll see the column and the spacing is somewhat different than that of a Torah as well. Torah Nevi'im Ksuvim B'Krach Echad. It's permissible to attach a Torah, the prophets, and Ksuvim, a total book of Tanakh, in one volume. And that's one of the reasons that you see, like the art scroll, the green volume of the Torah Nevi'im Ksuvim, all in one volume. And that, again, we're going to talk about the difference if there's any level of Kedusha when it comes to printed books, that we have the Chumash, the stone Chumash, or the other Gemaras that we have. The printed work, does it have any level of Kedusha? If you are doing each and every Chumash, you should still have 4 lines in between. Ubein call Navi v'Navi Shaloshitin, but when it comes to Nevi'im, it should be 3 lines. Ubein call Navi v'Navi Mashnim Eser Shaloshitin She'im Ba'alachto Chotech, and if you need to erase, you can go ahead and erase Zedurin Shal Nevi'im Kachu. And the order, so the Rambam here lists the order of the prophets: Yoshua, Shoftim, Shmuel, Malachim, Yirmiyah, Yecheskel, Yeshaya, Treyasar, Seder Nevi'im, V'Seder Ksuvim, Rus, Tehillim, V'Iyov, Mishlei, Koheles, Shir HaShirim, V'Kinos, which is Eicha, V'Daniel, Megillah, Divrei Hayamim. Call Kisvei HaKodesh. The Rambam concludes this chapter with an important halacha. Call Kisvei HaKodesh Ein Kosman Osan Ela B'Sirtut. All holy books need to be written with lines. Again, that's what we talked about yesterday. Sirtut are you would take a type of an awl or some type of a tool to try to score any type of line in the parchment. Mind you, again, it is from the skin of an animal. So it is a lot heavier than a regular piece of notebook paper, but you would go ahead and engrave this type of etch it into the paper, and you would make lines out of it. Part of it is for the neatness aspect of it, but part of it is also that it's a halacha Moshe Sinai, one of the laws that Moshe received from Sinai. Whenever we have these particular laws For instance, one of those laws are, like we mentioned yesterday, why are your tefillin black? Again, why not a fancy color? Why is the ink in the tefillin? Why is the ink in a Torah or the parshios of tefillin or in a mezuzah? Why is it black? The main reason being because it is um, a halacha Moshe Sinai. So call Kisvei Kodesh ein kosanos el b'sirtut afilu kosvan al haniyar, even if you wrote on paper. So it's a fascinating halacha that one of the contemporary halachic authorities wrote that from this particular halacha you see that if one has a blank piece of paper in general, not even talking about a Torah, okay, but if one is writing his own notes, it is preferred to use a piece of paper with lines on it. Now you might think like, why does that really matter? So the key thing is over here it would be called being neat. Okay, very often though you'll see that a lot of letters from rabbis or whatever will be written on letters on paper that is not with lines on it. The reason that that's a letter, but when it comes to writing thoughts of Torah, writing notes of Torah, like I'm sure everybody that's watching this is also writing copious notes on this whole thing. And obviously, don't worry, we're not going to be tested. That's okay. But the idea is one should, even if they're writing, they should write on lined paper. It is permissible to write three words without lines. Yoser al zeh, aser. More so than this, that is forbidden. Karach zeh sheyesh bo Torah nevi'im ksivim ein kedushaso kedusha sefer Torah. Now, if you do have one of these full volume Torahs, or full volume scrolls, I should say. The reason I am saying I should say is because it's not called a Torah unless it's only written for the purpose of a Sefer Torah. And not only that, if it's also written with all the other books, it's called Tanakh, Torah Nevi'im Ksuvim. Now, one of the things that's in a lot of synagogues, actually the Atlanta Scholars Kollel just recently, about 2 years ago, purchased a set of prophets. They use that, it's written on parchment, and it's written so that when they read the Haftorah on Shabbos or Yom Tov, they read it from a parchment. Now, why is that? Because some authorities feel that if you are making a bracha on a Haftorah, it's just like back in the day when they were being told they couldn't learn Torah or they couldn't read from a Torah, so that's where the idea of the Haftorah came up. So one of the things that we see from that is that there is a level of preference if you can use a Haftorah from a parchment. So something like that, which a book of Yirmiyah, a book of Yeshaya, which is totally filled with all the different Haftorahs, that does not necessarily have the same level of Kedusha as a Sefer Torah. So, but if you put everything in one volume, which would be a pretty thick, big thick piece of scroll there. So a lot of parchment being used. So that does not necessarily have the same level of Kedusha. It does, but it's not called a Sefer Torah. Okay? Ela kechumesh, it's just like a chumesh.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So I'm not understanding. What is the Haftorah?
So after we read the Torah, I realize, it's been a long time since we've been in Shul.
Now I understand. That's the last part that they read?
Yeah, so
after they close that.
Right, after you lift up the Torah, and
right.
Then, so the gentleman that's usually up there, after that, he reads something that is connected to the Parsha, okay? And
yeah.
So that's called the Haftorah. It's like a secondary Torah portion. So usually most of them have.
So that also wasn't a scroll? I mean, because I never seen any scrolls for Haftorah.
Yeah, so that's why I brought up that there are a lot of synagogues around the world, especially the older synagogues used to have special scrolls for the Haftorah. In other words, they would ask a sofer to write the different Nevi'im that pertain, or they would actually have a scroll with just the Haftorahs in it. Okay, it doesn't necessarily have a level of Kedusha like a Torah, but they would have like it would be the Haftarah for Bereshis. It wouldn't be the whole Navi, but the thing that the Kolo just recently bought was a set of Nevi'im in scroll format. And there are a lot of different rules because you don't necessarily, even though the writing is the same, but you don't have to follow the same standards as you were if you were writing a Torah. And that's one of the other difficulties is because they're not cheap. So when you're going to buy one of these, it's fascinating because a lot of them have a lot of errors. And, to go ahead, when we were talking about, when I write a Torah or when I'm fixing a Torah, I use what's called a tikkun sofrim. When I'm looking at a Navi to repair, there isn't that same book, that same standardized book to repair. Not that when I say repair, it's called tikkun sofrim. Okay, there isn't really a tikkun sofrim for Nevi'im. There is what's called very many years ago. There was a publishing company that came out and published a Torah Nevi'im Ksuvim in a black book, the Jerusalem Bible. Okay, and that was like a standardized full-fledged Torah Nevi'im Ksuvim, and the wording, the spelling was considered, very valid, and you can rely on that. So a lot of people, if they are checking to make sure the Navi, the Haftorahs are correct, they would use that type of book. But yes, there are those that do use, that do say Haftorah from a scroll. It's fascinating because in the Kollel used to be that, if you had a yurt site, if you're davening there, you'd ask to do the Haftorah and they would let you do the Haftorah. But now they only let 2 people do it because they want to make sure that A, you can read it without the vowels, and B, you can do the tune properly because you're not just nervous about making sure you get the words right. So it is definitely a different skill set. You've heard a lot of people reading the Haftorah, and they do a beautiful job. But when it comes to doing it without vowels, it becomes a whole different ballgame.
So the reason we're reading from the book, because there are vowels, right?
Right, exactly. Major advantage. And it used to be, I remember my father taught bar mitzvahs for many years in a synagogue in Baltimore, and he taught me mine. And one of the things that they used to give out to bar mitzvah boys was the Sefer Maftir. It was like a little booklet, and I think you can still get it. One of these early Hebrew publishing companies. So even though it was about maybe 5-6 pages, but basically it was the words of the Haftorah in a very big print. So you didn't have to like squint and look inside the Chumash and, and look at what the vowels are saying. It was literally blown up, and it made it a whole lot easier for the bar mitzvah boy. And he would read it out of the pamphlet. So although I do remember it used to be back in the day, there were a lot of different services, different minyanim on the high holy days on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in the synagogue my father worked at. So he had to make sure that they had in the different services that they had people to read the Torah. So we would ask the bar mitzvah boys from the few years of that year and the coming years after there would be a whole group of us that would read the Torah. So I remember reading the Torah on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. And yeah, it's really, on Rosh Hashanah, first day, it's, it's both days are actually the story of Yitzchak and the Akedah. But I do remember, I'm laughing because one of the kids, and my father would give copies of what from that book that I was telling you about, the Tikkun Sofrim, he would give copies So they didn't have to carry around the book with them, but that they could practice the reading and memorize it. And then when they got to the Torah, they'd be able to be pretty proficient at it. It used to be, it would be his best students that would read the Torah. And I remember it was really frustrating because one of the kids took this copy and stuck it into the Torah. Nobody could see that he had this like copy there, and he's with his little yod there and the little pointer, and he's reading directly from this copy that had the vowels in it. So that was really like frustrating, like, here this kid cheated, but that's okay, we're all older now, and yeah, but yeah, so a Torah does not have vowels, and actually that's a different question as well. There was a Torah that was quite a big scandal, that there was a rabbi who ended up, one of his jobs as a rabbi, because the community he was in did not have somebody that was proficient to read the Torah. So he actually went ahead and put vowels in the Torah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it became a big scandal because that's not permissible. So it's one of those things that the Rambam had mentioned as well, and the Shulchan Aruch mentioned. It's not supposed to have that. So then when
how do you learn the melodies? I mean, I'm talking, especially like Haftorah. I mean, you're reading, how do you know which melody? How do you,
So if you look inside, and next time we get together, I'll show you inside the Chumash, or inside this Tikkun Sofrim. They also, on the side where it's got the vowels, it also has the cantillation notes, okay, which is called the trop. So on each letter or on each word, there's a particular note, like a musical note. So for the Torah reading, it's a little different than the Haftorah reading, but as you learn it, you learn the tune. Like you learn, oh, this is a Dargos sphere. It looks like a little Z or whatever it is, and it has a different tune to it. There's actually, it's fascinating because someone recently, about half a year ago, read his first Haftorah, and I thought he had been taught by somebody else. He said no, he actually learned online. There was a I don't know if it was an app or whatever it was, but it was something that he was able to pick up, and somebody put out a video of how to learn how to read Haftorah, and did a beautiful job.
wow.
So there's so many things that are out there, but yeah, so that's how somebody would know how to read it in the proper place. The trop does, for instance, there stopping points in the middle of a verse, and then there's a stopping point at the end of a verse. So this way, you've probably heard when they're reading, like in the middle, they sound like they're pausing, and then at the end, it sounds like they're ending, but then they pick up again. So there are stopping points and pausing points within the verses as well. And that's pretty important, because when you're coming to learn the Torah and read the psukim, it helps you break it down to know, oh, okay, so this word goes with this word, and that we can and then begin to understand what the verse is trying to tell us. So those cantillation notes, that trop does actually help us with a lot of different things. It's not as big of a help as some would want to tell you it is, but in reality, it does help.
But let me ask you this. So the scroll that you write on a Haftorah, you don't put those cantillation signs in there?
No. It's in a it would be in a navi. Every particular, whether it's the Art Scroll Tanakh, or whether it's some other publishing company that writes Nevi'im, that you'll see these little notes on either the top of the word or on the bottom of the word. Those are the cantillation notes.
And what about the difference? There is a difference between Sephardic and Ashkenazi, or no?
Yeah, absolutely. Even they may say they're the same cantillation notes, but if you open up an Art Scroll Chumash, like in the beginning, there's like a little box, like before the Bereshis, there's like a box, and it will tell you like all these like strange words, Revi'i, Katana, Pazir, Katana, all those are, they list out all the different cantillation notes. So, but for the Torah reading, it's one way, and they're the same notes for the Haftorah as well, but they're read a little differently. So, and for the Sephardim, yes, very differently, even within different subsets of Sephardim, cultures as well, they may do it differently. Even German Jews, they will have a different tune as well. And there are different times of the year where when we're reading Haftorahs, like before Tisha B'Av, it'll be to the melody of Eicha, which is read on Tisha B'Av, the Megillah. So
what is our shul using in the main sanctuary? Which tune? Is it German? Is it Litvak? Is it?
It's probably more Litvak, more Litvish. Yeah, definitely Ashkenaz.
Yeah,
definitely in the Ashkenaz.
That's comforting.
Yeah, no, absolutely, definitely Ashkenaz as opposed to the Sephardic, which is probably across the hall.
Yeah.
Yeah. So some actually have more of a sing-songy way to it. Some have, a more of a. It's actually a sweeter, melodious tune to it, I think. But
if you listen to Zellman, everything is opera.
Right.
So.
Absolutely right. And it ain't, the Haftorah ain't over till a fat lady sings, right? But yeah, so that's in regards to that. But again, we wouldn't put in, just like we wouldn't put vowels in a Torah, we wouldn't go ahead and put those notes in there either. So it's interesting because there are differing opinions where I've seen where again, since you can use a chumash as well, so there are differing opinions, whether or not how you're to go about doing, teaching the bar mitzvah boy how to go about doing it, whether or not you can, if you're not using a scroll, or even if you are using a scroll, then you can go ahead and put some type of a plate, like customized plate, so this way you know what type of a note you're using for the Haftorah. Most opinions say it's better not to. I'm saying if you're using a scroll, to go ahead and put like a plate over it, so this way over this word, this is the tune, and but again, you can still read the Haftorah even without the tune. It's better too because it adds, some spice to it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Rabbi.
No problem. I really, by the way, it's great that I'm like, we have to start a support group for all the insomniacs in the world. So
that's for sure. But my camera is not working, and it's kind of, a lot of, so very was difficult getting that Zoom lined up. So I'm going to have to figure out another laptop, but that's probably later. So it may be some difficulty. I can show myself, and I can see you, and I can hear you, and that's the most important thing.
Perfect. So, okay. So So the Rambam then continues, Parsha Psucha Yesh Lo Shtei Suros. So we talked about yesterday, when you see inside a chumash, you'll see parts of the paragraphs are open, parts are closed. A part that's open is called a Parsha Psucha. A Parsha that is open, Yesh Lo Shtei Suros, that has two types of images. Im Gomar Bi'emsa Hashita, if it concludes in the middle of a line, Maniach Shar Hashita, Maniach Shar Hashita Panoi, Umastil Haparsha Shib Sucha, Mitchilas Hashita Shnia. So then you should begin the portion when the open part begins on the next line. What are we talking about? Shanishar Min Hashita Revach Bit Kishir Tesha Osios. That there's left over in a Parsha Psucha, an open portion, line a spacing of 9 letters. And again, I just can't reiterate it enough. And when we end up starting up the Minyanim and Shul, even though we have had Minyanim tomorrow, there'll be another Shachris Minyan outside where we actually read the Torah as well because it's Thursday. But one of the things you'll see is you'll see the spacing in the Torah. There are many Torahs in this Shul, and one of the things you'll see is that not all the Torahs are written the same, okay? Even though, yes, all the same words, all the same letters, but you can tell the higher end Torah from the lower end, and part of it is because of the spacing. I'm not talking about a Torah which is like, really just small levels of parchment, but one same size standardized Torah, they're all going to be the same level columns. But what I'm referring to is in between those lines, you can literally see the letters will stand up to you. Okay, when you get up there for an Aliyah, you'll be able to see them really clearly. So one of the things that he's stressed many times over is the spacing of a certain amount of letters. Now, in this case, it's a spacing of 9 letters. Im Shagomar Besof Hashit, or if he finished it at the end of the line. So one of the things that we end up seeing one of the things that we keep on noticing and seeing is that the idea of a poor planner, if let's say in general in life, everything is always procrastination, or when you're cleaning up and everything is just stuffed into a cabinet, everything is so when you open up the cabinet, everything falls out. When you are writing a Torah, if that's the way you are in your life, that's how your Torah is going to look also. And again, you're really not going to get a really high quality price for it.
That's why I'd probably never be what you do can't do it.
So one of the things is that you learn how to space properly. Now, when the Rambam talks about, or if you finished at the end of the line, that is somebody who didn't plan well enough. Okay, we're not talking, and that's why you'll use smaller points, smaller this, smaller that, or wider this, wider that. Sometimes you'll see wider letters, but one of the things that we do is the whole idea of I'm sorry. So one of the things that we do see is that this is very important when it comes to the writing. And so the idea of these stufa and stumos that he's bringing up now is not only that it comes directly from Hashem to Moshe, but that also helps us remember and recreate the whole Masorah aspect and validity of what our Torahs, that these are actually, not only are they the same words, same spelling, but when we're talking about the spacing, that's also comes straight into it as well. If you're not going to have the indentations at the same place, if you're not going to have a portion that's closed, if you're not going to have something that's not available, and you're just able to stick in another word there, like it's fascinating on certain documents in many years ago when I had bought a car, so I had to sign on the dotted line. It was actually a straight line, but it wasn't dotted, whatever. So one of the things that the guy at the place told me was, make sure you sign your name till the end of the line. Like I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, you don't want anybody to add something else on the line. I said, well, who's going to have access to this paperwork? Like, whatever. So
I think that was a very legal minded person.
No, absolutely. Oh, right. You're in this field, so in the real estate field. So,
yeah.
Yeah. So you don't want anybody necessarily having room to put some other numbers or something else or some other name there or to change the name and to change the title, to change whatever it is. So too with a Torah as well. You want the proper spacing, and if it's supposed to be an open space, it's supposed to be, because that's the way Moshe gave it over to us. So that's another way of testing. Like I mentioned yesterday, there are over 20 things that are built into the daily Torah life, the life of a sofer, to not only be a check and balance on him, but a check and balance on the Masorah as well.
So, I mean, with all those rules and with all those intricacies, how long does it take to write, let's say, one page, I don't know, or one sentence? I mean, this sounds to me like, I don't know, one Torah scroll a lifetime?
Oh, no, it could take you about a year, 10 months to a year to write a scroll.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's why, aside from, it's fascinating because I stopped when I first moved here, I used to sell tefillin and mezuzahs, and I had access to Torahs, but I stopped doing that because people used to think that I was saying they weren't kosher because I wanted them to buy from me. So I stopped carrying a stock. Now, one of the big things that they could never understand is, why are these things so expensive? Why is a Torah so expensive? When you think about it, nowadays a graphic designer, if he's designing something for a brochure for the Titel real estate group, so that, he'll sit at his computer, pick out a few things, cut, paste, put this down, put that down, and voila, he goes to his color printer and sends it up, or he'll just send it off to you via email and whatever it is, and put it out on social media, and you'll have your special brochure.
True.
And in reality, it probably doesn't take them a whole lot of time. The only thing that it does take a lot of time, and I'm not minimizing this part, is because someone who's in that mindset, that artistic and graphic design, you're going to basically, what you're doing is that you're working on getting it just right. Like, you see things the way it's supposed to be, placed here, placed there, how it's supposed to be coming out to you. And in reality, so I tell them, if something is done totally by hand, this is not like I punch in a computer and you don't have to, voila, Torah is written. It'd probably be the nicest Torah also, because you can take the nicest writing from this person, that person. And unfortunately, one of the biggest scandals out there, because with all the fancy printers that we have today, all the graphic printers, all the different, I don't even remember the terms, but there are certain styles of printers that it is really very hard to tell the difference, because you can even put the parchment through a printer. So, everything is done by hand, but you didn't write it. It was printed from a printer. So that would be a non-kosher Torah. So,
Wow.
So when you think about writing over 300,000 words, almost 305,000 words, rather 305,000 letters, and over 79,000 words. So when you think about that, that's a lot of words. I mean, I tried many years ago to write a book, and that was with a computer. And actually, I had 3 books on my, this was when we had not the floppy disk, but the other type of disk. And my computer crashed. I lost everything. The disk was totally damaged. And that was about 6 months worth of just typing. So imagine if I was writing that by hand, and the amount of work that would have been. So yes, a Torah does take close to anywhere from 10 months to a year. So when we're talking about,
I have one more question about that. I'm sorry.
As many as you want, please.
So when you're talking about the skills, I mean, you have to have like a painter, some kind of good hand, and exactly what prompts you to become, let's say, a scribe, or who writes.
Well, I think
and what talents do you have to have?
Some of it. I honestly am not an artistic person. So what motivated me was different than what motivated somebody else. Okay, I had an issue when I first went to Israel way back in 1984. I went after high school for a year in Israel to study, and my tefillin ended up were no good. The tefillin I had for my bar mitzvah were no good. So I realized, and I went to this Rabbi Yoshev. I'm sorry, somebody just keeps about this. There's a live stream as well, so someone's asking me about that.
No problem.
So what motivated me as opposed to what motivates others. So I realized like there's so many, here I am learning in yeshiva, a particular Gemara that we were doing then, but I was trying to learn a lot of different laws, trying to understand a lot of different things. So there's a section in the halacha called Hilchos Tefillin. So I started learning them, and within Hilchos Tefillin, there's also the laws of what the letters are supposed to look like. Okay. And I realized like, wow, this is like I didn't even think that, even though, yes, I grew up observant, but I never realized like, wow, these letters actually mean something. Even though, yeah, I heard about it, but then when you start studying on your own, then you realize like, wow, I used to say as a joke that I was motivated to one day apostle the person that told me to say my tefillin was no good. That's called a rapuzzle. So I said I wanted to learn it to check theirs and apostle theirs too. But that was just a joke. But
so would you say this is more an art or a science?
So it's more, honestly, you need to put both together. Not necessarily the science, but you need to put it's definitely not, although it's called scribal arts, and you have a lot of people in the field that are very artistic and have a very nice handwriting, but the problem is they don't understand that these laws have to be followed. Like for instance, like I told the story with that Rabbi Heinemann, that just because you have a nice handwriting and you're very artistic and you can envision how this whole Torah is supposed to look, but if you don't realize like a Zion is supposed to be written a certain way, or if you're writing for a Sephardi Torah, the Zion has to look a certain way, then your artistic ability is really meaningless. So it goes hand in hand that you do need to have some level of artistic ability, but it's also level of practice. And that's why, the first law of being a sofer is to be a fear of God. And again, I'm not saying that, look at me, I'm Mr. God-fearing individual. So because I'm a sofer, I got to be the most God-fearing individual in the world. No, doesn't mean that. No, it just means that I have an understanding of why these letters have to be a certain way, and that if I am going to write, I have to have certain thoughts in my mind. I can't be thinking, about like, wow, I wonder about that billboard I saw about that particular bar that night. I wonder what if that girl is really in that bar when I go to that bar. That's something that has to be not in my mindset, okay? Because then if I am...
But isn't it lonely? I mean, isn't it lonely? It's a very lonely job, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But you also realize it's like, there are you realize, like, you're giving life to a new book, or if I'm checking something, I'm also, like, for instance, there are a lot of Kabbalistic, you know, things behind, like tefillin, mezuzahs, and in Torah as well. But if somebody has some illness going on in their home or in their family, we shouldn't know of it. Or if things are happening, financial stressors, or I am not talking about pandemics. And although once this pandemic hit, people were wanting their mezuzahs checked, which is a nice thing to do. But people also get their mezuzahs checked during the high holiday season. They want to make sure everything is okay, just like, you would check. And the example I always give is, it's like an alarm system. If a sensor in your alarm system in your home is off, so that whole alarm system is going to not work. Keep buzzing, keep doing something. So too, if a mezuzah, if a letter in a mezuzah is off, or it's written improperly, or if it's starting to fade, or if it's something in your tefillin, if the corner of your tefillin is no longer a real corner, then Houston, we have a problem. We need to repair that. So lonely, yeah, it's just like any job. It's sort of like, if you're in construction, or if you're, if you're a writer, if you're this, that, sometimes it's, a pleasant thing to be on your own. But you're right, there is a definite lonely time to it.
It's scary. So do you check correctness of the mezuzah so we can bring it to you?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, that's good to
Certified
know.
from Israel. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, very good.
But, and like I said, this is not meant to drum up business, but since you asked, but yeah, it definitely, yeah, all that, and people don't realize, just because they saw me here once doing something with the Torah here, or it happened to have been another synagogue also. I tend to, sometimes it's easier to spread out here, but so they didn't realize that I did tefillin and mezuzahs as well. That's why it's called a sofer stam, a sofer that's of sefer Torah, tefillin, and mezuzahs. Usually they go hand in hand. And the mem doesn't stand for Megillah because it stands for mezuzah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so it does take a long time. It does, and it's like with any type of, that's why there's one of the suppliers I use. He basically he's based in New York. He has a whole bookstore, and he's got upstairs in his building, he has about 7 scribes working, doing a whole slew of stuff, writing Torahs. And it's like, they get up at 5 in the morning, get to work at about 8 o'clock, and they are writing from 8 to about 6 at night.
Wow.
Yeah. So you're with about 7 other people, but you also have other people that are checking mezuzahs, checking tefillin, or repairing the boxes, repairing this, repairing that, repairing a Torah. So it's like a whole big workshop. But one of the things when it comes to new Torahs that he tries to do is he has scribes that basically, like, and that's something that, yeah, in reality, a person in Atlanta cannot make a full-time business from being a sofer. It just, in Israel, that's one of, somebody who's a rabbi who wants to make an extra few dollars, so he'll learn how to be a sofer, and then he'll get tested, get a smicha, a Kabbalah, what it's actually called, and will then go ahead and be a practicing sofer. He can hang up his shingle, so to speak. But just like, or if he has, the Gemara actually says that if somebody has like a nature to be aggressive, he should become a shochet. He should become a slaughterer. Somebody who would take it out on the animals rather than take it out on. So there are different jobs that the Gemaras talk about. A sofer is known more as a, there's called a chachma beina malacha. It is considered a malacha, but it's considered a wisdom because you need to know not only how to write the letters, the way to write the letters as well.
Yeah, I figured this is much more complicated than I thought. And
Right.
then a user society, consumer society, we tend to buy new ones, throw the old ones out instead of repairing and fixing. But some mezuzahs, are very sentimental value, and so I don't know, it's tough.
No, absolutely. But like that's the same. You're absolutely right. There is a lot of sentimental value. I remember a pair of tefillin that one of the conservative rabbis had brought me, and the reason I say this is because he used to be an Orthodox rabbi, and he had asked me to check the tefillin, and they were one of these very old, very small tefillin, and generally, especially something that old, it's not going to last. It's like, you had a pair of shoes from about 30, 40 years ago. The soles are going to end up wearing out. Okay. So
Yeah.
the boxes were already like warped, and it's like with you're dealing with leather. So the boxes were warped, and the portions inside were like, faded. But I knew that would end up happening, but I give a warning, because if you open up a pair of tefillin that's not kosher and you find it not to be kosher, you can't close it up again. Okay.
Yeah. You have to fix it.
If usually it's very difficult to fix, because one of the laws with tefillin and mezuzahs is that it has to be written in order. Now the boxes don't have to be any type of order, that can be repaired, but the portions, if they're already faded, then you really can't. You got to get new ones. But people have such a level of sentimentality. So I told this to this rabbi, and he got upset because he said, "What do you mean you can't close it?" So I told him, I said, "Listen, you grew up practicing just the same way I am, okay? So you know full well the reason why I can't close it. The reason is because in case somebody would forget and say, oh, here's a pair of tefillin, why don't you use it?" So then he's going to go ahead and make a bracha because he forgot that they weren't kosher, and
Mm-hmm.
making a blessing on something that's not kosher. That's like a really, I don't know exactly the levels of bad things, but it's really not a good thing to make a blessing when you know you shouldn't be making a blessing on it. Okay, that's,
Mm.
you know it just is not a good thing. So I told him, just if you want, I can explain to the individual why, and I did, and the person was thankful that I was open with him beforehand and told him, and they were quite understanding. The rabbi had more of a hard time than this guy did, but yeah. So there's a lot to it, and be glad to, if you have any other questions, to answer them. But that's again one of the things that I'm trying to bring out here is that we have all these Torah classes, we have all this Torah study, not just this 48-hour program, but throughout the year, Ariel, Rabbi Zellman has classes, people checking in from all over the world, but when you think about it, it's all based from what we have in these Torah scrolls. And because of that, we want to make sure we validate that Masorah. And it's worthless if you open up one Torah and it says one thing, and then you open up another, it says another thing. But the fact that we're so meticulous and we really are very careful and driven by so many different laws and guided by so many different laws, that it's important to understand. And that's why I keep reiterating that this holiday is, it's, if it, during every year, I've heard from so many people in past years. This year is a little different because not everyone is fully back to work yet, but getting time off for this holiday is usually very difficult.
It
Okay,
is.
because you just got done with Pesach, and it's school's out, and sure, yeah, right, it's another Jewish holiday, yeah. Well, this, you're not going to fool me this time. It's not the New Year. It's not Yom Kippur. It's not that Sukkot holiday, the holiday of Booth, or Hanukkah, which even though you can work, you still took off, or Passover, or Purim, or whatever it is. But Shavuos never really got as much street cred or publicity. But in reality, not only is it one of our happier times of the year, but it's also one of the most important, because it actually the basis of everything else that comes from it. It's like we said on Pesach at the Seder, Ilu, the Dayenu. It would have been enough if he took us out of Egypt. It would have been enough but the last one, it would have been enough if he, if we didn't have the Torah. If we didn't have the Torah, we wouldn't be different than any other people. Okay, and that's what separates us. And it's not so much that we got the Torah. What it is that we have this document that has lasted for over 3,000 years. Now that to some is really, okay, big deal. It's like when I hear people talking about, which is huge, I'm not minimizing it, but when we talk about the living and breathing document that the Constitution of the United States is. That's fine, but when you think about it, it's what, over 250 some odd years, so it's like really but then when you deal with a document that's got, so many different, when the founders and the writers of the Declaration and Constitution were writing, I don't think they necessarily had these laws from Moses from Sinai, and there were particular pieces of language that they wanted and were very careful to use, but no one's going to mix that up with the level of holiness that we have from a Torah. And the reason that there is that level of holiness is because of the directness that it connects us with that of Moshe as well.
So, it may not be a very polite question to ask, but I just want to know. So let's say I would want to buy a Torah scroll written freshly. How much would it cost on the open market comparably? A range or so.
That's a great question, because you'll see Torahs come in all different shapes and sizes, but one of the things that you want to make sure you're getting it from somebody that knows what they're looking at, B, they're responsible, reliable, and also trustworthy. Like, unfortunately, there is a big black market out there. People steal Torahs all the time. But, in answer to your question, if you're paying less than 45,000, you probably got a really low quality Torah. And I know that sounds like really 40, but if you want something, again, there goes in different levels. There's something that's called, just like you'll hear very much describing when, the Torah uses a language of pre-eitz hadar for an esrog. It should be a very nice fruit. Okay, so from there, the rabbis learn out that there's this whole, and the concept of zeh keli v'anvehu, you should beautify my mitzvos. So the Gemara says that you should have tefillin, a nice tefillin, tzitzis, a nice talis. So the rabbis learn from that Gemara is that when we do particular mitzvos, it should be done in a nice fashion. So when I talk about anything less than 45,000, you're looking at, and I know that sounds like a lot of money, it is, okay? But, but in reality, that's just bottom, okay?
Got it.
You're looking anywhere from 60 and up for a nice Torah scroll.
Well, if it takes a year, just a salary for a person should be no less than 60,000 these days.
Oh, and I'm glad you look at it that way, because that's why this fellow in Flatbush in New York, who's got the store, and on the second level there's a whole team of scribes. So when it comes to new Torahs, he has a ton of different styles, different people, but he tries to get from people in Israel, because they could use the money. Not that people in America don't need the money, but that's their livelihood. Okay. Yep. Thank God I have a degree in another area, so I'm able to do something else. Someone who basically relies on his writing, whether it's sell mezuzahs or tefillin or writing a Torah, that to him, like, wow, I got my year's salary covered.
Right. And, and then you choose, and I don't know, it's somebody tries to tell me differently, but then you choose very observant and very so to speak, Jewish life, most likely there's a struggle in terms of financials going. So it's very difficult conflict going inside, like a businessman, should I or shouldn't I do more or less, and how it's going to impact the livelihood that I'm trying to create for myself. So it's a big challenge internally.
Oh, absolutely. But one of the things we're going to see towards the end of this is that, if you want the mitzvah of writing a Torah, you don't have to, you can, there are different ways. It's obviously a nice thing to be able to do it on your own, but you don't have to learn how to be a scribe to do it.
Yeah.
There are different ways and different methods. And no, it's not necessarily that I'm going to teach you how to cut some corners and, just for being up at this time of the morning, I'm going to teach you a couple different ways of accomplishing something that you may have never done. No, that's not the point of that. But the idea being is that there are certain ways of connecting to this commandment and doing it and fulfilling those with different options.
Yeah, I understand, but then something has to happen. Have to be going in the shul, right? I mean, how are you going to do? How are you going to connect? And if the shul doesn't write a new scroll, or the shul doesn't.
Okay, so you know what? One of the things. So I'll throw this out now. One of the things, again, one of the ways to connect with this mitzvah, if yes, not everyone has the financial right. Not everyone has $45,000, $65,000, $75,000 to buy a new Torah. And, even if I do buy a new Torah, what if, the shul already has? What if they don't want to use it? What if they don't want it? Most shuls will want it. But again, suppose I move, do I take the Torah? And that's a whole different question. But, once I get this Torah, what do I do with it now? Like, it's like, it's sort of like, if you have a Torah in your house, some people, I remember when many years ago when I was had my own home and married. My children, when they were younger, they used to love seeing me work at home because they felt it added another layer of holiness. That you see this, that this Torah that is only supposed to be in a shul is here in our home. And they would see them wrapped up on top of the bookcase or whatever it was. And basically they also knew, like, wow, we got to be they were little girls. It wasn't like they were, these wild Indian type children, and
not like mine. Not like mine.
But I'm saying that they're, it wasn't like they were using bad language or anything like that. But so they would always say, now we have to be really nice to each other because there's a Torah in the house. So it was stuff like that, which, basically, when you have a Torah in your home, it does make a whole bit of difference. But since you're bringing up the issue, I'll bring it up anyway. The idea of another way to fulfill this commandment, there are many opinions that say buying books. You buy a Jewish book to study. You fulfill the mitzvah of writing a Torah.
Yeah, but you buy the book's cheap, and you don't read it. You just have them and you compile. You feel guilty. All those books, and I never opened it.
Right. No, I understand. And if you, again, my other job is as a social worker in the mental health field. I could help you with that guilt as well. But but no, I understand what you're saying. But the reason I'm mentioning the idea of the books, yes, it's true, and then it ends up getting dust on it, and or if you could, there are ways, you give, you donate the books to the synagogue, you donate the books to the school, you donate the books to the kollel or whatever it is. This way, they're being used. If you're wary that okay, I have all these books and they're just getting a lot of dust and that's all they're doing. That is a concern, but it's also it's that way with any other type of activity, any type of mitzvah. Okay, the lulav, it's just I use it one time, every morning, so then it starts collecting dust. What do I need it for? What do I need it to fill? And they sit in the bag all day, so what? Yeah, it's like really, yeah. So it's that. Unfortunately, every mitzvah you could say that for, because unless you realize there is some value to either having or to have the ability to have. It's like, I there were certain books that I knew growing up. I used to see like either my siblings or myself that I knew I would have, whether it's homework, to work, and whether it was a chumash, whether it was a particular explanation on the Torah or whatever it was. So I knew that those were important books to have. So especially as you have children, which I know you do, and they're going to Amir Hashem grow, and they're going to have homework and want to study, and they're going to need the added help of looking inside that book to help them with their homework or whatever it is. So there is a value to build up some sort of a library as well.
Yeah, you need some guidance, when you come from a secular world and you have to figure it out, you don't even know which books to buy. And
absolutely. Absolutely.
And which books, you say that, you buy Jewish books. Is that just the Talmud or just any Jewish book? Or
okay, that's also a great question. So, so it could be something on the Chumash. It could be, like a Parsha book. And it may look like it's a kid's book. The Medrash says, it may look like it's a book for children, but that's still considered Torah. Yes, does it have a kedusha of like put it on the level of a Torah scroll? Absolutely not. There are certain people that won't put, a sitter on top of a chumash because a chumash has a level of holiness. So I do remember there was a story when I was in Israel many, many years ago. So a particular head of the yeshiva, Rabbi Meiselman, who was the nephew of Rav Soloveitchik, known as Rav. So he learned with him personally for very many years. And so on the desk that he was sitting at, there were a lot of books, and on the bottom was a chumash. So someone had pointed out to Rabbi Meiselman that there was a chumash at the bottom. Is that okay to have all these other books on top? So he quoted his uncle, Rabbi Soloveitchik, and Rabbi Soloveitchik used to say when a similar situation happened. So he said, I usually put the smaller ones on top of the bigger ones. In other words, it's better than to have them falling over, better to be neat than to have them falling over and say, oh, the chumash is holier. So his opinion was when it comes to printed books, they don't have necessarily a level of holiness to it. But yes, it is very true. One of the things you'll notice, if you do end up sending your kids to a Jewish school, or if the kids are going to a synagogue school or whatever the school is, whatever the situation may be, that they're going to end up having some type of book study, whether it's a chumash, whether it's a navi, whether it's a halacha book, a book on Jewish law. So one of the things that people end up noticing is that their lives are going to be guided and led by their lives of their children, especially in their younger years, okay? Because I know, I saw that myself. I saw what the books that my sisters and my brother was using, and then I knew that, especially as I was starting to have children, that my kids were going to go needing those type of books too. So I made sure that rather than them not having, I wanted to make sure they did have. Yes, okay, the fact that I was able to help them understand what the words meant and understand what the commentators are telling. Thank God, yes, I'm blessed. I was able to do that. But the idea of, not necessarily knowing, that's why you talk to people that do.
How you talk to people, they do. I mean, some questions sound to you so simple and stupid, and but it is important to you. It's very tough. When you come and you have like thousands of questions and prioritizing them is just tough.
So in the first chapter in Pirkei Avos, the chapters of the fathers, which people have the custom throughout, from Pesach through Shavuos, there's 6 weeks and there's 6 chapters. So one of the things it says is Aseh lecha Rav, make for yourself a rabbi. Now, why does it necessarily use that language? Because, and then it says Kanei lecha chaver, acquire for yourself a friend. Okay, the Mishnah is very careful in the language that it uses because there's aseh is doing, it's a positive action of doing, and with a friend, it's acquire. And it doesn't mean to buy a friend, okay? Because generally what it means when you use the language of acquire, it usually means that there's some type of financial transaction. Now, very often, if, again, I don't know how things were in your part of the world, buying a friend doesn't usually mean it's going to last very long.
That's true.
They're not going to necessarily be there for you, especially once the money dries out. They're going to dump you pretty quickly. So, so at least that's how it is here in the Randall, USA. But I think it's a international way as well. So but the reason that it uses the language of acquire, it means that you need to have mutual interests. You have to have mutual understanding. You have to have mutual respect. So when it comes to a friend, that's why it's acquire. It's a sense of working. It's a sense of understanding each other and working on the relationship. And chaver and their other understanding of that a friend doesn't necessarily mean just the guy you go to the baseball game with, or you tell your innermost secrets. It's someone that you share wisdom with, Torah, whatever it may be. That's a friend, because your study partner, my study partner that I had in yeshiva, or my study partner I even have today, is called a chavrusa, a friend. Okay, so there are a lot of ways that you can use and be with a friend. When it comes to a rabbi, it's aseh, okay, because there have to be necessarily, as the commentators on the Nefesh Chaim says, there has to be no borders, no walls. You have to literally make yourself and make yourself somebody that you can ask the difficult questions. Not just the difficult, but it also has to be a literal continuity, a level of always going and doing, okay, because it's a positive thing. It's even with the questions you think, that's too simple. I don't need to ask him. Why do I need to go talk to him? But that's why the Mishnah tells us, Aseh lecha Rav, make for yourself a rabbi. It's someone that will connect you to not just your question that you're asking, but it's connecting you as well to the Torah that Moshe, because Moshe is known as Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe our rabbi, Moshe our teacher. So one needs to make for himself a teacher, a rabbi.
But in this world, in today's world, when we are all, so to speak, segmented and so specialized, and somebody specializes in kashrut and somebody specializes in that, really you're trained to go to professional and expert in every particular field instead of, having one guy who knows all and everything. And it's very hard because that's how you approach. Then you create like 5 or 7 rabbis and then you get lost. When you're coming from the secular world, it's very difficult to comprehend what you're just saying. Like, have one rabbi, how much trust do you give? How much respect and all that, and everything else takes times and years to earn the respect, and you don't have a short period of time if you want to get an answer today.
No, I understand what you're saying, but take for example this pandemic. Okay, whether leave politics aside, whether you think this was something that again, if there's others out there that find this conversation not whatever, but I don't know who else is on. I don't but this is all important conversation. So we had this pandemic, and there became this spokesperson for the medical infectious disease aspect of it by, Dr. Fauci. Okay, he became the face of the pandemic. However, there were many different opinions out there. Not necessarily everybody agreed with him. However, one of the things that you see very clearly, and yeah, there were times where the White House didn't necessarily agree with him, but yet you didn't find him being, again, the media may have brought it out that he was going to be fired, he was this, so was that. I don't think he was ever in danger of losing his job. But the idea is that, in a situation like that, and I think we have to approach our lives as well with this, and that's what the mission is telling us, is that you need to have a singular voice. Yes, we do have specialties. You do have kashrus, but there are going to be particular things that are of particular note to you, of importance, and that's why it's aseh l'charav. Yes, the rabbi you have may not necessarily be the kashrus expert. He may not be the sofer, but he's going to know who to send you to if you need your tefillin check. He's going to know if you have the idea that the kosher chicken wasn't necessarily kosher, but he'll be able to tell you where to go, or he'll be able to tell you why this supervision is no good. Okay, he may not necessarily be one of the koshering agencies. He may not necessarily work for the OU, but he's going to have an understanding of what the world of kashrus is. But more importantly, the reason the Mishnah says, aseh l'charav, make for yourself a rabbi, it's for you, your own individualized. The idea is that it's got to be someone that knows your situation, because very often when it comes to halacha, for instance, there were situations in different communities where the rabbis put out certain, things that everyone needed to follow, like shutting down the shuls, shutting down certain avenues, shutting down where people shouldn't have guests. They shouldn't have, the community shouldn't have people coming in to the community. They didn't want visitors. So there were particular situations, I am fully aware of, that there were particular situations that on a personal level, if the person did not have a particular guest coming in, whether it was a grandchild, whether it was a child, okay, and we're not talking about somebody that was in their late 80s and they had a compromised health situation, but they had called their rabbi, and the rabbi knew their particular situation, and he said, yes, certainly, if you don't have your child coming in, this will be really a grave situation. So what you see from that story, and that was just one of many different situations, is when we're talking about aseh l'charav, you're talking about a situation where the rabbi is going to know you. And when you're dealing with halachic situations that are bound to come up, okay, whether it is, my child doesn't want to go to this school, or the, I don't know if this level of observance of Shabbos is right for me. Whatever the situation may be, or, my wife doesn't want to go to the mikvah, whatever the situation may be, aseh l'charav tells us that you need somebody that's going to know you. Okay, it's going to be someone that knows your particular situation. Okay, we had throughout this pandemic a lot of major halachic issues that came up. There's a famous rabbi in Israel, in Yerushalayim, named Rabbi Usher Weiss. One of the issues that came up was the concept of mikvah. In England, the government shut down everything. Okay, and when it came to the mikvah, they had to come up with very strict standards of cleaning after every use and sanitizing, and okay, for health reasons, they need to do that. What was the big question? Big question was the amount of time that it took, that there were going to be some women that needed to, their day that they had to go, they weren't able, and they also were shutting it down at certain times, or they were shutting it down at night, whatever the situation was, question came up, were they allowed to use the mikveh during the day? Now, yeah, Rav Asher Weiss is a huge rabbi, so he was able to decide the question. But on a smaller level, the individual rabbi that these people had, a Seilecha Rav, that they went to their individual rabbi and they were able to discuss the issue with him. And they were able to, and he was able to decide, particularly for their individual needs, what worked best. And that was still within the framework of halacha. And that's also like when we're dealing with, the laws of how to write a Torah, the laws of Masorah, all these are dating back to, Moshe at Sinai. All these are dating back to how one connects the original concept of the Torah to making it a reality into our daily lives.
Yeah, I grasp that. At the end, it's just the implementing in life. It's much more complicated.
No one said it's easy, as the old saying, which I really never liked too much. Sheretz design a yid. It's very difficult to be a Jew. That used to be the old adage, especially of the Jews coming from Europe. And in a lot of ways, it is very difficult. But, the idea is whenever, you're faced with a situation, it shouldn't necessarily be that it's difficult. There's a joy to it. And that's why, at a procession, so you talk about, the idea of it being lonely, being a sofer, being a scribe. There are, when one is finished, when they do a celebration called a Hachnas Sefer Torah, bringing the Torah into either the synagogue or to the home or whatever it is, there's usually a very big celebration. There'll be dancing, music, and there's a whole celebration, and sometimes even torches. It's something which is celebrated. It's just like either a new birth, the Torah will be carried in under a chuppah. It'll be just like a new couple being brought in to their wedding. So that again, just like we have this concept of Har Sinai, it's the greatest wedding that ever was between us and God, we being the bride, God being the groom. And, the receiving of the Torah is the ultimate gift. Okay, why is it such a great gift? Okay, in reality, when you think about it, we're coming out of Egypt being slaves, having to be under a ruthless slave owner named Paro. Or, I often wondered also, in our day and age, we have so many people coming, from other nations, whether Russia, other nations within there, and you got to wonder what keeps them coming back. Some of them may not have even had the education. Yourself, what kept you to want to come to this congregation? Okay, there was either a longing, or your wife. I know it wasn't your wife because you were here before that. But the idea being, what?
No, you're right. I mean, this is there's something drives, and something. There is something that beyond your control. Eventually, you find your way through. The issue is how much damage do you do before you find your way through.
Right. So that's the beautiful thing, is that, again, that's not necessarily up to us. It's up to us to realize to stop the damage. It's like, in reality, we have the ability to plow through it because we have this, and that's why, I thought that this would be a timely topic, because when you look at the words of what the Rambam, what we read yesterday, the idea being that, writing, again, and I'm not saying that, oh, I'm so special because I can write these. No, what I'm trying to say is, even when you study it, and that's what the underlying message of what the Rambam's saying, is that this mitzvah is so important of writing a Torah, buying books, or learning Torah. That's another way some say you can fulfill this mitzvah, is because you're connecting to Moshe and God at Sinai. You're connecting to that moment. Okay, and I know there's this website of for saw you at Sinai. Okay, that's a nice concept, but in reality, do we actually believe that we were there? But every time we take the Torah out, every time we take a Jewish book out, we are finding ourselves connecting to that moment. We find ourselves connecting to the ability to connect to not only Hashem, but to the greatest teacher of all times. This has been a fascinating, where we now got, let's see, a little more than 15 hours to go of this 48-hour experience. Okay, and in reality, it's a beautiful thing. But
Yes.
what's aside from being a nice idea, but it's connecting us to not only prep for the holiday, but it's connecting us to what is in reality a very, very important thing. So that's one of the things that we have to have an understanding of, and that's something that in reality, that's something that brings us closer to who we are and what we are. One of the things that I had seen an article that in the therapeutic psychology world, one of the biggest issues that has come up is the idea of people being together for such a long time has caused a lot of people have a lot of people have had issues with the ability to connect. And what ends up happening is there's been, because either children that are home during this time frame had realized, what do their parents actually do? Why are their parents always arguing? Why is this brother not getting along with this sister? Why is this brother not getting along with this sibling? Whatever it is, within the realm of the mental health world, it's become a big issue. And one of the things that in New York, New Jersey, they had noticed one of the more successful ways of combating that within the greater world was that the schools and the yeshivas had set up programs for the students, for the children, and for the adults to have Torah study time. Now, when you think about big deal, okay? Yeah, there's so many things on TV to do, so many things on, online that you could have downloaded. But the fact that we still had that level of connection and that we still had that level of the ability to still talk and the ability to still go ahead and connect, like the Rambam says, every time, like we read yesterday, every time that one writes even one letter, okay? So that will bring up the concept of being connected to Moshe Rabbeinu, okay? So one of the things we've been talking about has been, writing a Torah, and that's the final mitzvah in the Torah. I'm sorry, what?
No, I mean, that's, one of the surprising things, is that, you kind of, during this pandemic, you kind of felt that void that something is missing, when the shul is closed and Torah classes is not there, even though you sometimes think it's too much, it's pushing on to you too much, and then you suddenly realize there is a void. And I think this seminar, this 48 hours is just proof that, that void is existent, we need to fill. And so that's...
Absolutely, for sure.
That's a revelation for myself.
Sure, no, absolutely. So a couple things, just as I'm looking now at what's called the Minchas Chinuch, the Book of Education, and it's a listing of all the different mitzvos. As I mentioned earlier, the Rambam has in what's called the Sefer HaMitzvos, and the not only is there a listing of the mitzvos, but the Rambam has his own listing, and he has a particular mitzvah called writing a Sefer Torah. So in this book, the Book of Education, there's the Hebrew version with explanation called the Minchas Chinuch. And one of the things that he talks about is that Benoheges, he always lists the mitzvah, the source of the mitzvah. Of course, the source of the mitzvah comes from the portion of Vayelech and Nitzavim Vayelech. And he goes ahead and at the end will always talk about, he lists also the particulars of how to write the Torah, like we were discussing in the Rambam as well. And there are other avenues too that there were other avenues as well that he lists, particular of how each letter needs to be written. Again, not that he's the halachic source, but his purpose of writing this book was basically to educate his child about what the importance of the mitzvos and what their validity is and where their source is and how to do it. So he gives in each an explanation of the mitzvah. And towards the end, he also states for each mitzvah of how we are accustomed in our day and age, because this is not something that was written back in the Dark Ages, and also what happens if you don't do it as well, as far as if you missed out on it. So just to read a couple of his last lines, Heges b'chal makom, it's a custom to write it in all places, who calls man in all time, bizacharim, by males, shehein chayavim b'talmud Torah, because they are obligated in learning the Torah. Ukmokein lichtov osa, so below hanekevos. And it's a custom on him to write it, and not because he's got the obligation to learn Torah, and not on the females. Now, there are mefarshim that say, can a woman write a Torah? Now, we're not going to get into that particular halachic discussion. Answer quickly is no. The over alzeh below kasav sefer Torah. If one is over, again, whenever he uses the language of over, it means he didn't do it. Okay, on this and below kasav sefer Torah, and he doesn't write a Torah. Im efshar lobosam inyan lobisham inyan, and he doesn't have a Torah. It's impossible for him to do it with any other way. Bittul asezeh. He's nullified this particular mitzvah. The anshu gadol, the punishment is great. He siba lilmod mitzvos haTorah kemosha marnu, because the reason and the understanding is to learn and to be able to teach the commandments of the Torah as it says. Below, v'kol mekayimosa yiyah b'soch v'yichabam hu v'vanov kemosha kasu kasu lachem es hashir azos v'lamdas b'nei Yisrael. So the main purpose in writing a Torah is to have people be able to study the Torah. So the basic purpose, like we stated all along, is that if we're going to have, the idea is to populate the world with books. Again, bizmanenu, in our time, the electronic book is a whole lot faster than taking a year and writing a Torah. But the other purpose in writing the Torah is not just, aside from the study and to understand our mitzvos, it's to not lose that Masorah. Because if we're going to have a time where we're not going to have Torahs written and we're going to just rely on the Torahs from years ago, A, they get very fragile, and B, we're going to end up losing out on a whole lot of stuff, and we're going to end up forgetting, and we're going to end up having situations where the fear of forgetting and losing that Masorah. That happened with Ezra, that happened in many generations and many times, and that's why Ezra wrote many different copies of the Torah, and even after him, the Ben Asher version, which was very similar to that of Ezra, obviously, and the Rambam mentions that as well. The ability to write is not necessarily an out. In other words, if I say, I don't know how to write, I have a sloppy handwriting, does that mean I am free from this mitzvah? Clearly not, because he says it's up to you to figure out a way to do it. Why? Because we want to make sure people have books to study from. Now, one of the things that we discussed, and again, I hope I had answered your questions, and If I didn't, I apologize. I'd be glad to discuss anything further with you. But I just want to get in a couple different things. So again, a couple other ways, just like other ways that that we see that you could perform certain mitzvahs. Like for instance, if I am not a moel and I need to have my child have a bris, but I certainly wouldn't trust myself to take a Mila knife and go ahead and do a bris Mila. So we hire a shliach, we hire a moel, Rabbi Shulgasser, Rabbi Kushkaman, Rabbi Asa, whoever it may be locally, whatever it is, there are professionals out there that can do it. So too, if I don't know how to write a Torah, I can go ahead and hire someone to do it. No, I am not leaving my business cards with Rabbi Friedman. Hire me. No, that's not the point of this talk. The point of this talk is to teach us ways of fulfilling this commandment. So we hire somebody to do it. That's why there's so many different campaigns to write a letter. As we mentioned earlier, that if, let's say, according to the Rambam, even if you wrote one letter, it's as if you wrote the whole Torah. Okay, it doesn't have to be the last letter. It doesn't have to be the big bays in the beginning. It doesn't have to be the hazinu, the letter hey, or the word hazinu. It doesn't have to be. The reason I say hazinu is because it says kisvu es hashir azos. It's referring to hazinu, but the idea of having somebody else do the work for you, you hire them, or you get involved in a campaign and spend, whatever it is, per letter, 360. It used to be many years ago when these campaigns were started, buy a letter for $18, and what a bargain. You got yourself the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah. And that's something else that we got to think about. Really, my $18 is as if I wrote the whole Torah. So according to the Rambam, that one letter, even if you ask somebody else to write it, is allowing you to fulfill that mitzvah and is as if you wrote the whole Torah. Because, like we've mentioned in the past, that again, if without that letter, without a single letter, without a single dot on the Chutz Shel Yud, the little part, the little protruding part, the bottom part of the Yud, without that, the whole Torah is worthless. The whole Torah is as if it's not a whole Torah. Okay, so you don't necessarily, although we are very thankful, we are in a shul where we have many beautiful Torahs, and I see Mr. Glassman. Hopefully we'll be able to use your Torah very shortly. Back again, beautiful Torah. And certainly we see someone had fulfilled that mitzvah in a very beautiful way. But there are other ways to go ahead and fulfill this mitzvah. There are Rishonim that learn from this, since the mitzvah of writing a Torah is to learn Torah. So the idea of buying books, buying Jewish books, buying whether it's Gemara, whether it's Mishnah, whether it's a Chumash, whether if you buy, from your synagogue, a stone Chumash, whether if you buy your Yisrael Siddur, that could be considered allowing you to fulfill this requirement. So there are many different ways that one can go ahead and fulfill that requirement. So one of the other things is that comes up, we talked about buying books, because there's a Gemara that says in Megillah that all Torahs need to be written in Sifrei Kodesh, in Lashon HaKodesh, in the Hebrew language. Now, why is that? Because that was the language that God gave to Moshe, and that's why it's called Lashon HaKodesh, the holy language. So one of the things that we need to understand is, if we say that the mitzvah of writing a Torah is to learn Torah, to have the ability that we are populating the world with more Torahs, and or fixing a Torah that this way you're now putting it back into society to be able to be used and to be able to be read from. So that's all awesome. That's great. So can I fulfill that? We just talked about fulfilling it with buying Jewish books. What about we live in a generation today where the English book, or if it's a Russian book, or if it's a book in any other language, would that be something that one can fulfill their commandment with? This big 613th commandment, can one fulfill that with buying English books? And the answer to that is actually from many different posts can have this answer. But the answer is yes, because just like, we have, and it's fascinating because we have this mitzvah of Shtayim Mikra V'Echad Targum, meaning that when we go through the portion of the week, we should read the portion 2 times and 1 time with an explanation, with a translation. Usually that's understood to be Targum Onkelos, or that's also understood to be Rashi. A lot of people do it with Rashi, but not every pasuk has a Rashi on it. So how can one fulfill that? So in our day and age, if the concept of Targum is to understand, that's what Targum means, is because it used to be back in the day when they would read the Torah, the Gemara in Brachos tells us that they would read a verse, and then there'd be somebody, first somebody would get up, make the blessing, and he'd be the one that would actually be the Torah reader. Actually, the little secret is what's been going on at the morning minyan. Adam Brash, a super Balkore, has been not only making the blessing and reading the Torah and doing Hagba, and also took the Torah out because of the social distancing issues. So the Balkore has been doing everything. Back in the day, it used to be that he would make the bracha also, read the Torah, and then make the bracha afterwards, and someone else would be called up. Again, what we're doing with social distancing is not having anyone else come up. However, one of the fascinating things is next to him would be somebody translating. Why? Because we want people, when the Torah is being read, to understand it. So we're living in a society that not everyone understands Hebrew. Not everyone understands the language of that the Torah is being read in. So and we don't have somebody standing up to near the Rabbi translating. It just doesn't work that way. That's why when you live in a society and they have an English Chumash, that will work. If your Targum is actually English, you can actually fulfill your mitzvah of Shtayim Mikra V'Echad Targum with English as well. Now, that would allow us to understand the question I had asked, whether you can fulfill the mitzvah of writing a Torah with English books. The answer to that is yes, because if that is the language that is not only being spoken, but that is the language of being of understanding, then the understanding is then what other language am I learning from but the language that I speak? So yeah, it'd be nice if you can learn from a Hebrew text. That's nice, but it shouldn't stop you. And that's why, yes, there are plenty of English books, and there are plenty of books online and things of that nature that one can fulfill their mitzvah of writing a Torah. Now, there's a fascinating Mishnah. We talked about the idea of, in the 6th chapter in Pirkei Avos, we talked about the idea of the 48 Devarim, the 48 things that Torah is acquired with, as opposed to the 24 and the 30 of Kahuna and Melucha and Kingdom. The Mishnah, so then they list all these 48 different ways, and one of them being limud, learning from other people, anava, humility. All these things are very important, because in order for one to have an understanding and the ability to learn Torah, they need to have the ability to learn from other people. And it's a fascinating thing to look at over the years, people who were not willing to take the plunge and and join a class or whatever it may be, they are unfortunately, probably not taking the plunge too well during this like pandemic either, because after a while, when you don't have something that is constantly alive, like what the Torah is, and that's what I wanted to read this Mishnah. The Mishnah that comes after that Mishnah that discusses the 48 ways. Gedola Torah shino senes chaim lo sehal ba'olam. Great is the Torah, for it confers life upon its users. In lo sehal ba'olam hazeh, those who use it in this world, uba olam haba, and in olam haba. Shenamar, as it says, for they ki chaim heim l'motzehem l'chol basara marpe, for they are a way of life for those who find them, and a healing to his entire flesh. The Omer Rifus Tila Sarecha. And it also says it shall be healing to your flesh and marrow to your bones. The Sikoi and it should be also a total healing for your bones as well. The famous words that we say when we sing when we put the Torah back, is a tree of life for those who grasp it. And its supporters are praiseworthy. And it says they are a tiara of grace for your head, a necklace for your neck. And it says and it says it will give to your head a tiara of grace. It's bringing the proof from that pasuk in Mishlei. And it says, indeed, through me, the Torah, your days shall be increased. And years of life shall be added to you. And it also says the length of these days are to the right, and it's at its left as well. The richness and its honor. For lengthy days and years of life and peace shall they add to you. So the purpose of these last 2 days that I've had the privilege of being with you guys and sharing my insomnia with others is actually to give life to those that use it and those that share it. And the beauty of not only bringing life to a Torah itself, but bringing life to those that use it and those that learn it. It's been a pleasure, and I do hope that you take advantage of the rest of the 15 hours or so that's left to take care of the beauty of this 48-hour drive, and have a wonderful Yom Tov, and accept and receive the Torah with the love that it was given, and honor and respect. Have a great day. Take care.